Hello everyone, it's ArrangedKarma here, and today I am making a video that's in theme with Christmas, because Christmas is all about coming together as, as families, as friends, and enjoying the holidays, and consumerism. And as you know, in the past year, things have been hectic, crazy, and people have been divided over things like the US presidential election. And I figured to lighten the burden that we all share and bring some holiday cheer into our miserable lives, I would tell us a sweet little war story, back during the Second World War, that, can show us that we can come together no matter the adversity that we face as a species, because in times like this, that's what we need, to come together and focus on the sunrise of tomorrow. So, the story I will be telling you today is of a lovely lady known as Elizabeth Winsken and her uninvited guests during the Battle of the Bulge. The story takes place during the Battle of the Bulge. It was an operation between the 16th of December and the 25th of January, 1944 to 45, where German troops launched a major offensive through the Ardennes forest in the hope of capturing the harbour of Antwerp, separating the Allied forces, and perhaps, trying to regain the initiative in Europe and push them back out. But on the Christmas Eve of 1944, 3 American soldiers were lost during the battle and were missing in the Ardennes forest, and they were desperately trying to make their way back to their own lines. They had been walking for a solid 3 days, trying to make it home, and one of them was badly wounded. And then they happened upon a cabin in the woods. Inside the cabin was Elizabeth Winsken and her 12-year-old son, Fritz. Their home and their 88-year-old bakery in Aachen, Germany, Aachen, had been bombed and destroyed, so they had moved to a cabin in the border, hoping to stay away from all the mess and, try and avoid the war. They had been hoping to spend Christmas Eve with their father, well, Fritz's father, I should say, who had been staying in Aachen and delivering food to them every so often, but with all the snow and all the winter coming in, it was clear that he would not show up. But on that night, they heard a knocking at the door. They heard voices outside, speaking quietly. Elizabeth answered the door, and while Fritz waited in silence. 2 men were standing outside. They spoke in a strange language and pointed to a third man sitting in the snow with a bullet wound in his upper leg. They were American soldiers. They were cold and weary, and they just wanted to get out of the cold and try and find somewhere warm to stay the night. Elizabeth then mentioned to her son to get 6 more potatoes from the shed. Elizabeth could not speak English, and neither could Fritz by extension. And the Americans couldn't speak German, but their communication was possible with signs and broken French. While Elizabeth sent Fritz to get potatoes, she also told him to kill Hermann the rooster, named after Hermann Goering, whom she disliked. Elizabeth had planned to roast the rooster when her husband joined them. As the rooster was being roasted, Fritz answered another knock at the door, expecting more American soldiers, as you might imagine. But instead, there were 4 armed German soldiers. Elizabeth and Fritz could be executed for harbouring the enemy, but the situation was dire. Elizabeth went outside and addressed the German soldiers, a corporal and 3 privates, all also cold, hungry, and lost. She told them they were welcome to come inside and share the meal with the others present, but they would not consider friends. The corporal asked whether the Americans, if they were Americans, and Elizabeth answered yes. They were also lost, cold, and hungry, and one of them was wounded. The corporal looked hard at her and eventually responded, "Es ist Hilgabend und hier wird nicht geschossen." It is the holy night, and there will be no shooting here. She insisted they leave their weapons outside and remained same of the Americans collecting their weapons and putting them outside. As the Germans entered, the air was tense. The enemies eyed each other warily, but they sat and smelled the chicken roasting. Things began to ease. The Germans produced a bottle of wine and a loaf of bread. While Elizabeth tended to the cooking, one of the German soldiers, an ex-medical student, examined the wounded American. In English, he explained that the cold had prevented infection, but he'd lost a lot of blood. He needed food and rest. The tension among them gradually disappeared. One of the Germans offered a loaf of rye bread. One of the Americans presented instant coffee to share. But by then the men were eager to eat. Sorry, I can't read. And Fritz's mother beckoned them to the table. They were all seated and said grace. "Come, Herr Jesus," she prayed, "and be our guest." There were tears in the eyes as I looked around the table. I saw the battle-weary soldiers were filled with emotion. Their thoughts seemed to be many, many miles away. This is the account of Fritz, by the way. Because, I kind of skipped over that, but I'm sure you could figure it out. Now, they were boys again. Some from America, some from Germany, all far from home. In the morning, both sides made ready to depart. The German corporal advised the best way for the Americans to make it back to their lines, showing them one of their own maps. He even gave them a compass. My mother gave the men all their weapons back and said she would pray for their safety. At that moment, she became a mother to all of them. She asked them to be very careful and told them, "I hope someday you will return safely to where you belong. May God bless and watch over you." The soldiers shook hands and walked in opposite directions. Fritz and his parents survived the war, his mother and father passing away in the 60s. Fritz married and opened a pizzeria in Honolulu, in Hawaii. Although he tried for years to find any of the American or German soldiers who had stopped by the cabin on Christmas Eve in 1944, he had no success, there we go. Not even when President Reagan mentioned the story in his 1985 address, in context to the German reconciliation. When the TV program Unsolved Mysteries broadcast in the story of 1995, someone reported that a man living in Frederick, Maryland nursing home had been telling the same story for years. Fritz flew there, and in January 1996, he met with Ralph Blank, one of the American soldiers who still had the German compass and the map. Ralph and Fritz sat together, and Ralph told Fritz, "Your mother saved my life." Fritz also managed to later contact one of the other Americans, but none of the Germans. Fritz died on the 8th of December 2002. Amongst his final words, "My mother's courage won't be forgotten, and it shows the good that we will do." Elizabeth Vinsken, I just can't read German, would often say, "God was at our table" when she talked of that night. So this is just another little war story, as last Christmas I told one about Verdun and the Christmas truce and whatnot, that just shows that even 70 years ago, back when the political ideals of two different nations across the world were at each other, killing each other in the most brutal ways imaginable, in a horrific war where millions have died and were left homeless and butchered in concentration camps and death camps, even in that horrible mess, there was still little rays of light, little glimpses of hope, of people just being people on lovely Christmas days and just holidays in general, of people trying to just be people in a once insane world. And I think that rings true today, after all the horrors we faced in the past year. As, things so far back as perhaps the Pulse nightclub shooting, and Christina Grimmie, and the presidential election that has been tearing the United States apart, and leaving tensions risen all over the world. I think it's time we just take a step back and look at stories like this, and we need to remind ourselves that even in the most darkest situations, people can still be people, and come together and realize that they are more than just cogs in a machine, soldiers in an army, part of a left or right, political demographic. They are people, and they need to start acting and treating others like it. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. I shall probably leave a link to the story I was reading from in the description, should you want to check it out for yourself. But thank you very much for watching. Happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, happy whatever you celebrate, and I shall see you next time.